You didn't give me the prayer list. Huh? Oh, I see it. Thank you, John. Now then, if it's not in front of my face, I won't see it. May not see it then. On our prayer list this morning, Cookville Hospital is Raymond Haney. He's on the fourth floor. And at home, and asking for our prayers is Hillary Broom. He's had a rough time for several years now. Are there any others we need to add to our prayer list? I feel like I'm competing with somebody talking. Is it you? Am I competing with you? That's all right. I'll forgive you, son. Last week we were in Phoenix on the Isle of Crete, the western side of the island. It kind of comes out like a natural harbor in a V shape, and they planned on staying there for the winter if they had to. It wasn't a good place to stay. They didn't have entertainment rooms, things like that for visitors. They wanted to get on over to closer towards Italy if they could, so they decided, against Paul's warning, they decided to set out from Phoenix and get over towards Rhegium, go up through the strait there by Sicily, between Sicily and Italy. So that was the intention. Paul told them it wouldn't be a good idea. Nevertheless, they don't know if Paul knows what he's talking about or not. So they tried to make the run. That brings us to chapter 27, verses 13 through 44. And this is just travel, so it's not going to be not much going on. When the south wind blew softly, things were going really good. They thought it would be bad, but Paul said, but it's actually pretty nice sailing. The south wind was blowing softly, and supposing they had attained their desire, they went ahead and put out to sea. They took off, and they sailed close by Crete. But not long after, a tempestuous head wind arose, called Euroclydon. So when the ship was caught in that wind, a hurricane, I reckon, or a typhoon on the water, the ship was caught in it, and they could not head into the wind, probably just going around in a fairly large circle. They just turned the ship loose and let her drive. They couldn't steer it, so what they would do is they would tie the rudders down and let the ship go wherever it wanted to go. Running under the shelter of an island called Clauda, we secured the skiff, that's their lifeboat. We secured it with great difficulty. When they had taken it on board, they used cables to undergird the ship, wrap around the ship, and fearing lest they should run aground on the Syrtis sands, they struck sail and so were driven. They were at the mercy of the wind. Because we were exceedingly tempest-tossed, the next day they lightened the ship. On the third day, we threw the ship's tackle overboard with our own hands. Everybody was throwing stuff overboard. They knew they had to lighten the ship or the ship's going to be pulled underwater. Now, when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, no small tempest beat on us, all hope that we would be saved was finally given up. But after long abstinence from food, Paul stood in the midst of the soldiers and sailors and prisoners and said, "Men, you should have listened to me and not have sailed from Crete and incurred this disaster and loss." Read a guy, he said that Paul's saying, I told you so. And I don't think that's what Paul's doing. I think he's trying to make his point. You should have listened to me, because as it turned out, I was right. Now, seeing that I was right before, why don't you listen to me this time? I think that's the point he's trying to get across to him. You see that the Lord spoke through me. This time you need to listen to me. So, verse 22, now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. Nobody's going to die. Ships are goner, but you all are going to live. Question, does Paul know what he's talking about or not? That's what it all boils down to at this point. For there stood by me this night an angel of the God to whom I belong, with whom I serve. And the angel said, do not be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar. The Lord had already told him this once. And Paul probably kept it in the back of his mind that he was going to stand before Caesar. He's not going to die in the sea. And now he's being told that all life on the ship is going to be spared as well. This, of course, indeed, God has granted you all those who sail with you. The Lord is doing it for the sake of Paul, that Paul might have his prayer answered, I reckon. Therefore, men, take heart, for I believe God that it will be just as it was told me. However, we must run aground on a certain island. He doesn't know what the island is, but he knows they're going to run aground somewhere. Nevertheless, even though they do run aground, everybody's going to still live through it. If you listen to me, you got to stay on the ship. Now, when the 14th night had come, as we were driven up and down in the Adriatic Sea, in the Greek text it says the Adria. And I'm not sure if the Adria means the Iconian Sea or the Adriatic Sea. I don't think it means the Adriatic Sea. And I'll show you a map in just a minute and show you where I think they were. I could be wrong, so whichever way you want to spin, that's all right. And about midnight, the sailors sensed that they were drawing near some land. They could tell. They took soundings, and they found it to be 20 fathoms. They had these horn-type things that they would sound, and they would measure how long it took for the echo to return to them. It would bounce off land and come back, and they'd measure, and they could tell somewhat what their distance was. So that's what they were doing. They were taking these soundings, and they believed they were about 20 fathoms. When they had gone a little further, they took soundings again, and they found it now to be down to 15 fathoms. Fearing lest we should run aground on the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern, and they prayed for a day to come, slow the ship down. They dropped all their anchors, hoping to drag the ship, make it go slower, in case they run up on ground, they wouldn't just bust the boat all to pieces. Here's the area I think they were being tossed about in the sea. Now, this is, according to this map, this is the Ionian Sea. Adriatic Sea is up there in that narrow spot. Now, according to the King James English text, it says the Adriatic Sea, which means they went all the way up into that area. Now, that's possible. But Adria in the Greek could also be translated Onian, which might be the Ionian Sea. So it could be that their storm was confined to this area, or it could be they were shoved up north into the Adriatic Sea, up and down alongside the coast between Greece and Italy. I think this is where they were, though, best I can figure out. When the 14th night had come, this is from verse 27, we were driven up and down the Adriatic Sea. Again, it's possible, but that's a strange route to go up and down, especially for a wind on the open sea. It usually doesn't thrash you about that way. However, the Lord's involved, so anything's possible. As the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship, the sailors knew what was coming. They knew that sooner or later they're going to run up on ground, the ship's going to bust apart. So what do they want to do? They want to get in the lifeboat, drop down into the water, and take their chances in the lifeboat and let everybody else perish. So when they had let down the skiff lifeboat into the sea, under pretense of putting out anchors from the prow. They acted like they were trying to take care of the ship. Truth is, they're trying to escape from this sinking ship. Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. They've got to stay in the ship too, or, all of us could be in jeopardy. The promise is off. So the soldiers, they cut away the ropes of the skiff, and then they just let the lifeboat go. Nobody was leaving that boat that day. And that, of course, was at the words of Paul. They had to stay in the ship. That was a condition of their salvation. Condition? Everybody always says, don't have condition to salvation. They did on this day. Either you stay in the boat or you're not going to be saved. Well, obviously, the soldiers believed Paul, regardless of the fact that the sailors did not. The soldiers apparently did. As the day was about to dawn, Paul implored them all to take food, saying, today is the 14th day you have waited and continued without food and eaten nothing. And of course, they're getting very weak at this time. Therefore, I urge you to take nourishment, for this is for your survival, since not a hair will fall from the head of any of you. He continues to assure them of the divine promise. When he had said these things, Paul took bread, he gave thanks to God in the presence of all. When he had broken it, he began to eat. Then they were all encouraged, and also took food themselves. Their faith is increasing as things progress. And in all, we were 276 persons on this ship. So when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, they threw out the wheat. Even that's what they were hauling, was wheat to Italy. So they were throwing everything off the ship. They knew the boat was going to go down. So they wanted to ride it in as close to land as possible. The more they throw off the ship, the higher up in the water the ship comes, the farther they can get towards land before the rocks tear the bottom of the boat out of it. When it was day, they did not recognize the land. That's odd for these sailors. But they saw Malta, but they didn't recognize where they were. I'm a bit surprised by that. But it could be they'd never been on that route before. I guess it was. They didn't recognize it. But they observed a bay with a beach. There's sand. There's a bay carved out of the ground on this little island. And they see the beach. They believe they may have a chance to run this boat up on that sand, on that beach. If so, they can get to land safely before the boat falls apart. They observed a bay with a beach onto which they planned to run the ship, if it was possible, if they could do it. They still had a hard time trying to drive this thing when they let the rudders loose. They planned. They didn't know what was going to happen. They let go of the anchors. They just cut them loose and left them down in the sea. Don't need them anymore. Meanwhile, loosing the rudder ropes, that's what keeps the rudder from moving. They're going to try and drive it now, okay, to get up in that bay. They want to aim for a spot to land. So they cut the rudder ropes off of it, and they hoisted the mainsail to the wind. They're going to let the wind drive it, and they made for shore, hoping for everything to hold together until they got on ground. But striking a place where the two seas met, they would come in like this in a upside down. Well, it'd be a right side up B shape. And when they got in between these two seas, the rush of the water from both seas, they don't know where that boat's going. Just hold on for dear life. But they did run the ship aground, just not where they wanted to. And the prow stuck fast up front of the boat, down under the bottom, and it remained unmovable. It stuck into the ground and stayed put. But the stern, the back of it, was being broken up by the violence of the waves. The boat is lodged in between the two seas, and the boat is being hit by water in both directions, and it's just beating the back end of that boat off of it. So that's as far as they go. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim away and escape. This is one of the things you want to keep in mind when thinking about they said the soldiers fell asleep when they were guarding Jesus. Nobody believed that, because the penalty for that, allowing a prisoner to escape, was death. They would have been put to death. Back in Acts chapter 12, verse 19, when Peter got out of the prison, Herod searched for him, could not find him. He examined the guards and commanded that they should be put to death. That's what they did to soldiers. If the soldiers, when the Christ was resurrected from the dead, if the soldiers had fallen asleep and let his disciples come and carry him off, which nobody would have believed, they're just foolishness, they would have been put to death. This is where the chief priests and all them said, we'll take care of you. Here's the story we want you to tell. And you tell the story and we'll take care of you. Probably one of these deals where if you bother these soldiers, you're going to have a riot on your hands. And Caesar's going to get up in arms. And that's how they peddled that tale of theirs. But everybody knew it was a common practice. That's what these soldiers knew. That's why they want to kill the prisoners. If they get out in the water and they try to make for land, these prisoners are going to go in every direction, trying to get on land and get away from them. And that will mean certain death for them if they allow them to escape. So what do? Let's kill them. And that way they can't escape. That's the idea, the plan they got in mind. But the centurion, he's taken a liking to Paul. He believes Paul, I believe. He probably believes Paul is being protected by divine providence. He kept them from their purpose. He wouldn't allow them to kill the prisoners. He commanded that those who could swim should jump overboard first and get to land. The rest, those who could not swim, some on board, some on parts of the ship, and so it was that they all escaped safely to land. If you can't swim, grab a board and paddle in. And that's what they did. And all 276 survived and wound up on the land. We got in the next section, it's 3 months in Melita, or Malta, it's also called. Chapter 28, this is the final chapter, verses 1 through 10. Now, when they had escaped the storm, they then found out that the island was called Malta. And the natives showed us unusual kindness. Luke is with them, obviously. The natives showed us unusual kindness. We don't know how many traveled with Paul, his own brethren, because the centurion allowed Paul to have visitors, friends, to be with him. But we do know that Luke was with him. For they kindled a fire and they made us welcome because of the rain that was falling, because of the cold. Fortunately, they didn't get on an island that the natives would kill them, but instead they showed them a great deal of hospitality. But when Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and laid them on the fire, a viper came out because of the heat and fastened on his hand. A viper could be either a snake or one of these little ugly animals. There's a lot of poisonous creatures. I don't know what all of them are, but there's various different types of poisonous creatures in those islands. It could have been a snake, probably was, but it could have been something else too. Whatever it was poisonous. Now, the fire, of course, created heat, and the viper, which may have been frozen, was resuscitated from a stupor that it was in. And when it did, Paul was reaching in to get sticks. The viper bit him, latched onto him, fastened on his hand is what the text says. So there he is with this thing, a snake probably, hanging from his hand while he was tending this fire. And everybody's seen it. The Isle of Malta is down here in the southernmost part, below Sicily. kind of like Cuba is to the United States. It's a small island there, and has natives living on it. But this is where the ship finally landed. It's one of the reasons why I think they were probably in the Ionian Sea. It appears that they were going southward more so than northward. So when the natives saw the creature hanging from his hand, they said to one another, "No doubt this man is a murderer." Must have been a politician. A snake latched onto this man's hand, and they come to the conclusion, no doubt he's a murderer. He's guilty of murder. Okay? Just because they see a snake latched onto his hand, they draw the conclusion that he's a murderer. People are odd when you listen to people. They jump to some of the most outlandish conclusions when they hear something has happened. They immediately assume what has happened or why it's happened. They don't know. They don't have any facts. But, facts, that's just those things that get in the way. They had a feeling. And, feelings go much farther than facts. They assume he must be a murderer. People are fickle. And hey, when you listen to people on TV, listen to politicians. Forget who they are. Listen to what they say. Listen to their words. Words have meanings. And when you listen to the actual words that they speak, sometimes it's frightening that they wield the kind of power that they wield, because they're very fickle. I know I've mentioned it a number of times. I'll mention it the rest of my life again, I guess. But when they were appointing, forgot his name, for the Supreme Court, and some woman come out just out of nowhere. She said he tried to rape me back when we were young. And where's the evidence? Well, there is no evidence. And you've got senators, United States senators, 10 of them. And every one of them, without exception, well, one of them's our vice president now. Every one of them, without exception, told that woman, "I believe you." Why? Why do you believe her? Hillary Clinton said women don't lie about stuff like that. Well, I don't think anybody here is really going to buy that. If you got a son, you're not going to buy it, that's for sure. But how could otherwise intelligent people make such a conclusion without any evidence? That's something that it makes me very nervous, not just for my sake, but for everybody's sake. If a woman, for example, can accuse a man of doing something wrong, and if you're going to just take her word because she said it, and women don't lie about stuff like that, what becomes of the guy? What if that's my son? Or what if that's one of you? What becomes of him? Just because she accuses him of being guilty, we're going to assume that he's guilty? People lie all the time. But it's amazing sometimes to me how fickle people are. I'm not saying they're stupid, but they're fickle. They have no moral compass. I mean, they'll go whichever way the wind blows, and it's sad that people have so much potential for intelligence and character, and they waste it on nothingness. But they do. It's always been that way. It's not new. It's not like we're a bunch of freaks. But look right here. A snake bit Paul, didn't turn loose. What's the conclusion? Oh, he must be a murderer. Where do you come up with these ideas? No doubt this man is a murderer, whom though he has escaped to sea, justice does not allow to live. They call that karma. May have escaped to sea, but karma will get you in the end. So he shook off the creature into the fire, and he suffered no harm. Now watch these folks. However, they were expecting that he would swell up or suddenly fall down dead. But after they had looked for a long time, and Paul didn't get sick, no harm came to him, they changed their minds. He's not a murderer after all. He's a god. One minute he's guilty of murder, next minute he's a god. They're ready to worship him. It's sad. It's so sad that people think in these lines. I watched it over in India. People over there starving to death. And they stop at these little houses along the side of the road, and they put in what little money they got. I mean, they got nothing to eat, and then they'll go over here and they'll bow before a rock. They bowed before this rock all their life, and yet they're giving what they have, what little they have, they're giving it back to this rock. For what? What did the rock ever do for them? It did absolutely nothing. But they continue time after time, day after day, to worship this rock or a monkey or a cow, whatever it is their favorite god is. They continue to worship this thing. You know, people are more intelligent than that. I don't care where you're raised. I don't care how you were raised. Within each one of us is intelligence. We all have the capacity to reason, to draw intelligent, rational conclusions. You don't have to go to school to know how to do that. That's a natural attribute we have. It's something that we can exercise, that we should exercise. But so many people don't. They go with the flow. It's like when people go to vote. Do they actually know the character they're voting for? No. You got a D, I pull your name. You got an R, I pull your name. That's how people make a decision. A, B, C, D, oh, I'm going with the R. Well, what about I don't know anything about this person. And then our country gets into trouble and we wonder what went wrong. It doesn't have to be that way. It shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be. It makes me so sad. They changed their minds. He's not a murderer. He's actually a god. And all was well. In that region, there was an estate of a leading citizen of the island whose name was Publius, who received us and entertained us courteously for 3 days. Now it happened that the father of Publius lay sick of a fever and dysentery. Paul went in to him and prayed, laid his hands on him, and he healed him. It was something Paul had done many, many times, but it's the first time something like this was ever done in the presence of these natives. So when this was done, the rest of those on the island who had diseases, they started coming and they were healed. They did well to entertain Paul and company because now he was going to heal all their family members. They also honored us in many ways. And when we departed, they provided such things as were necessary. The Lord was taking care of his Paul providentially. Of all the places they could have crashed, they could have wound up in the middle of the sea, but they didn't. They could have wound up on an island that was hostile to strangers, but they didn't. It just so happened that they wound up on an island where the people there were susceptible to entertaining strangers and treating them good because they were good in turn. Okay, they hit the right island, in other words. God promised Paul, when he started this journey, that he must stand before Caesar. Nothing was going to stop that from happening. It looked like the promise wasn't going to be fulfilled, but it was. At the last minute, so many times it comes at the very last minute. You think you're going down for the count, and all of a sudden God reaches down in the sea and he pulls you up out of the water. That's what happened to Paul and company. That's what God does for those he loves. We know that all things work together for good. Not for everybody, but for those who love God. You know, that promise isn't made to everybody. It's only made to a few people in the world. But all things will work together for their good, for those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. And you see providence at work in the life of Paul. That's why we can always be confident when we see things that are frightening, like right now in our nation, a heartbreaking situation, things that are going on, CRT, for example, or how about over there in Virginia? They opened up the libraries, and you see the books children are looking at. I'm talking about 3, 4, 5-year-old children in preschool, and then in the low grade. Have you seen those books they're looking at? I never seen nothing like it in my life. I ain't gonna tell you because I can't tell you. But it's awful what they've got these kids learning. And parents don't know. You send kids to school, you assume everything's going to be okay. But then, you start finding out stuff like this, and I think, maybe I need to find out what's going on down there. The pictures and things are so explicit. And most of it has to do with boys and boys and girls and girls. They're really, really, really trying to push that. The theme of one book was trying to get the children to experiment with their peers. Okay? That was the whole purpose of the book, was to get them to do this stuff. And you find out that way if you're a boy or you're a girl. Or the other Virginia school, where that boy, he put on a dress so he could go into the girls' locker room, went into the girls' locker room and tried to rape her. Her daddy got mad, took it before the school board, and what did they do? They threw him out of the meeting. Cops hauled him out. So what did the school board do? They moved him out of that school and sent him to another school. So many people knew what he did. He wanted to get into the girls' locker room, so nowadays, if you want to, you just put on a dress and you can go and say, I'm a girl right now. And they let you into the locker room and you try to rape a girl. I suppose if they caught you, you'd say, well, now I'm a boy. You can flip back and forth now. You can be a girl in the morning and a boy in the afternoon. Now, I'm not lying. This is what's going on. And it's absolutely insane. And don't think the White House isn't pushing this. Because they are. So much more. So much more. CRT. CRT, white people aren't any good. We're evil people. People of color, they're good people, but they're just not intelligent enough. Not like white people. White people are more intelligent, but they're evil. And you got kids. I remember I didn't know what was going on. I did not know what was going on. But I remember one day, Amanda probably was in the 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. She came home from school, and she said, Daddy, I'm ashamed of being white. I said, hold on, Mama. I thought I was fixing to have the big one. What do you mean you're ashamed of being white? White people are evil. Who told you that? And I went up one wall and down the other, stuck my head through 2 or 3 of them. She begged and begged and begged and begged and begged me not to say anything because you know how kids are. They didn't want to bring all this attention to herself. I didn't. I should have, but I didn't. And I've always regretted it. I didn't know they were teaching that stuff. Yeah, it goes way back then. You see, that's what teachers learn in college. And then they come into these little schools. Some teachers, they don't buy it. Okay, they know that's a bunch of stuff. But some teachers, they fall for it. They accept it. And then they'll come into school, these little people, and they'll start teaching the little people. Only thing now, it's more in your face than it ever was before. And they're about to have a revolution. Watch the election in Virginia Tuesday. It should be a real eye-opener. People in Virginia, I think, are on the verge of a revolution. They are hostile. You won't see it on the TV news because they don't show you that stuff. But it's all going on. You can find it if you want to on the internet. Fox News, forgot the other news channels right off the top of my head. But there's ways to see what's going on. It's just the major networks that are part of the system.
Don't you think, John, that's just a prelude to getting rid of the Bible, tear down the morals, and cast out the Bible?
Oh, sure. It's socialism. I mean, it's the same thing Stalin, Hitler. It's the same thing all of them did. It's, well, you know what's coming. It's not a secret anymore. They've made it crystal clear what they want. Anyway, Section 8, we're going to come to Rome now. Chapter 28, verse 11 through 16. After 3 months there at Malta, we sailed in an Alexandrian ship whose figurehead was the twin brothers, which had wintered at the island. They were lucky. In landing at Syracuse, we stayed there 3 days. From there, we circled around and reached Rhegium, and after 1 day, the south wind blew, and the next day we came to Puteoli, where we found brethren and were invited to stay with them 7 days, and so we went toward Rome. The last trek of their journey, here they are at Malta. They'll go north and stop at the island of Syracuse. Then they'll go a little further into the straits between Sicily and Italy, and they'll go into the city of Rhegium. And then they'll go north farther, and they'll come to the city of Puteoli. And from there, when the brethren heard about us, they came to meet us as far as Epiphorum and the Three Inns. When Paul saw them, he thanked God and took courage. Now, when we came to Rome, the centurion delivered the prisoners to the captain of the guard, but Paul was permitted to dwell in himself with a soldier who guarded them. Their final stop was, of course, in the city of Rome. That road there from Puteoli, where Paul got off the ship and went to Rome, that road's still over there. If you go there, you can walk that road into Rome if you choose to. It's a pretty long ways, but you can at least walk it. I forgot the name of it. Bill, you know the name of that road? I can't remember what it's called. It's very popular. Interview with the Jews. Are we out of time? Okay, I can go a long way in 3 minutes. And it came to pass after 3 days that Paul called the leaders of the Jews together. So when they had come together, Paul spoke and said, Men and brethren, though I have done nothing against our people or the customs of our fathers, yet I was delivered as a prisoner from Jerusalem into the hands of the Romans, who, when they had examined me, wanted to let me go, because there was no cause for putting me to death. Let me pause for just a moment. It's easy to suppose that by teaching that the law of Moses no longer applied, and that now we live under the law of Christ, it could appear that the apostles were anti the Mosaic system. Okay, that might be a person's impression. It certainly was the impression of many, many Jews. That's not true. Jesus and his church, his kingdom, was fulfillment of the prophecies of both Moses and the prophets. They were preaching, futuristic of course, they were preaching about Christ's presence, sacrifice, resurrection, and kingdom. That's what the prophecies were all about. When Paul and company started preaching what had taken place, they weren't anti-Moses, they were pro-Moses, because they were preaching what was the fulfillment of what Moses and the prophets had proclaimed. In other words, everything Moses and the prophets preached has come to pass. And that's what we're preaching. He's not an enemy of Moses. As a matter of fact, him and Moses are in total harmony. But that's not the way the Jews saw it. They saw it as blasphemy against Moses and, of course, against Yahweh. But that wasn't the case at all. So Paul's making his pitch to these Jews in Rome that he never did anything against Moses, the law, or the Jewish people. That wasn't his intent. It was his purpose to show that their prophecies have come to fruition. And now they needed to turn towards the Christ rather than holding on to what's no longer viable. But when the Jews spoke against it, what Paul preached, I was compelled to appeal to Caesar, not that I had anything of which to accuse my nation. For this reason, therefore, I have called for you, to see you and to speak with you, because for the hope of Israel I am bound with this chain. You and I, my Jewish brethren, we're not at odds with each other. There were Asiatic Jews that took offense to my preaching. Now what I would like you, brethren, to do is to listen to what I have to say and make your own personal judgment. Don't be judged, swayed by the judgment of the Jews of Asia. Hear me out for yourself. That's the position he's taking. And they said to him, we neither received letters from Judea concerning you, nor have any of the brethren who came reported or spoken evil of you. They haven't heard anything about Paul, which is really weird. But we desire to hear from you what you think. For concerning this sect, we know that it is spoken against everywhere. They knew that the Church of Christ was spoken against by the Jews in all parts of the globe. Nevertheless, even though they had heard nothing good about the church, all they heard was bad, nevertheless, they were willing to listen to what Paul had to say objectively. Now, you got to give these guys credit for that. All people don't do that. If they've heard something bad about you, they assume you're a bad person. But these guys weren't that way. They were willing to hear him out and make judgment based on his own words. And I said I could get done, but I didn't. So we'll stop here, and Lord willing, we'll finish the book of Acts next week. I've seen a bunch of good